So we're talking about the 2020 version 2 Santa Cruz Hightower. We're talking about a long-term relationship. I've been riding in battle on the Hightower since August 2019. I want to give you my long-term impression. I want to help you decide, is the Hightower the one bike to answer all of your mountain biking problems? So as you probably know, this is the Santa Cruz mid-travel 29er trail bike. It's 140 in the back, 150 millimeters travel up front. It does have the reduced offset fork geometry, and we're definitely going to be talking about that. I was lucky enough to be able to build up a CC frame, but just know that the things that I'm going to talk about in this review can really be generalized to pretty much all of the build kits. I'm rocking a Lyric Ultimate 150 up front. For several months, I was running the Stan's MK3 Arch wheel set. I more recently upgraded to the Reserve 30 carbon rims, which I really like. Stay tuned for a review on those wheels. And then I pretty much have a GX Eagle build kit. I've got a 1-up 180 dropper post and Renthal carbon bars and stem. I actually decided to pick up the Hightower because of transition bikes and the Santa Cruz Megatower. Let me explain. 2018, I got to spend an awesome day in Bellingham, Washington at the Transition headquarters demoing a few of their bikes. I really fell in love with their SVG geometry, essentially what is reduced offset fork geometry. In other words, a relatively slack head tube angle combined with a reduced offset fork. For me, it really created a nice balanced package of capability but also maneuverability. I actually felt like my cornering and my jumping specifically were really balanced on those bikes. And so come 2019, I was really excited to see the Megatower released with that reduced offset fork geometry. Fast forward then to the summer of 2019, we actually took a trip to Park City, Utah to spend an awesome week on Santa Cruz Megatower. I went into that week thinking that the Megatower was going to be really capable downhill, but kind of sluggish in pretty much every other aspect. And to my pleasant surprise, it was actually a very respectable climber, but like those transition bikes, it felt super balanced. I felt like my jumping was really on point on the Megatower, as was my cornering. And so I really liked that balanced feel. And so as soon as I got home from Park City, I ordered one of the CC frames in the Hightower because I still felt like after spending that week on the Megatower that it would be a little bit too much bike for probably 80% of my riding. This is a bike that can excel in a lot of different areas. And it sounds super cliche to say that, but I've had this in a lot of different settings, including just going to my local trails that are very general cross-country riding, but then it actually has a pretty progressive jump line. We often go down to Baker Creek Preserve in Knoxville, Tennessee, that has some fairly large jump lines. So let's hone in on some specific characteristics that a lot of people want to know more about. Climbing. Climbing is really good on the Hightower. It's not cross-country race bike caliber, but it's certainly very efficient. The VPP suspension, for me, creates a really nice, crisp platform for pedaling. On a lot of our big outings where we go to places like Baker Creek Preserve in Knoxville, where you're just pedaling up, 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 just to be able to bomb down the jump lines, there's not one time that I'm ever inclined to reach down and hit the blue lever on the RockShox Ultimate because I need more stiffness. I never even think about that blue lever because it's a very efficient pedal platform. With the 65.5-degree head tube angle, a couple years ago that would have been considered insane to say that a bike with that degree head tube angle would be a good climber, but when you combine it with the relatively steep seat tube angle, it's actually a really efficient climber. On things like steep and sharp switchbacks, this thing actually does really well. Between the grip that you can get from the rear suspension and then that steep seat tube angle, I feel like my front tire stays nice and planted, and it's nimble enough and centered enough to be able to work around those switchbacks without feeling cumbersome. And then for efforts where you're either trying to sprint uphill or even on flat sections of trail, like coming out of berms and then trying to sprint for speed, it's actually a really efficient platform as well. This would be, by most people's standards, a true trail bike. At 140 in the back, 150 up front, it has to be a bike that climbs really well, and I definitely think the Hightower lives up to that sub-classification. Just for big, epic outings where you're pedaling out a ton of miles, the Hightower is going to be a really good bike for that because it's not such a big bike that you don't feel like you can pedal miles, but then it can take care of you when the trail starts to get steep or rough. Playfulness. I think of playfulness on a mountain bike as your ability to manual, bunny hop, even wheelie, and pop off from little roots and rocks to be able to create jumps out of things that maybe otherwise wouldn't have been a jump. And I'm gonna say the Hightower for me has not let me down in that. In fact, my manuals have progressed by leaps and bounds. But for me, it's a nice and balanced bike that really does manual well. The same goes for wheeling. I don't feel like I have difficulty holding a wheelie on this bike. Bunny hopping, you do have the bigger wheels underneath you, but I feel like I can at least bunny hop this as well as any 27.5 bike that I've had in the past. Jumping was a huge priority for me when upgrading bikes. I wanted a bike that would really help me progress in my jumping skill. This is not my first nice mountain bike. I've been mountain biking since I was little. I've been jumping things since I was little. I really wanted to progress, and this is a bike that has definitely allowed me to do that. We're not that far removed from most people thinking that you don't get a 29er for being playful and for jumping. You get a 29er because you can just eat up the rough stuff, but it's not really going to corner well, it's not going to handle well, it's not going to be that playful. I definitely think the Hightower squashes that notion completely. It's a super snappy bike, it's definitely playful. I love jumping it, whether that be popping off from roots or rocks or actually taking it down legit jump lines. I think that it's a really good bike. But then it does take care of you when it gets really rough, having the bigger wheels. It's almost like you notice the benefit of the 29er, but you still have all the playfulness of about any other bike that I've personally ridden. So part of the confidence that I glean from the Hightower with jumping is knowing that if you come up short and you case a jump, or if you overshoot a jump, with it being on the more capable end of the spectrum of trail bikes, it's gonna be able to soak up those hits, no problem whatsoever. So for me, jumping is a definite win on the Hightower. Cornering. I think that cornering is not talked about nearly enough in bike reviews. I've historically, in the last several years, spent a lot of time on long front center, short chainstays, 27.5 bikes, and for me, I felt kind of off balance for cornering. I felt like I was constantly behind the bike. I was having difficulty weighting up the front end. So that's why I've really gravitated to the reduced offset fork geometry. For me, it puts me in a much more centered position while still maintaining a huge amount of capability with that really slack head tube angle. The chainstays are not super long, but they're really not super short. And again, to me, that creates a really nice and balanced feeling bike. I still feel like it's plenty snappy and capable and playful. My cornering is better on this bike than a short chainstay bike with a long front center. And then last but absolutely not least is descending. If you like having fun on a mountain bike, you want to have a bike that descends really well. Again, that relatively slack head tube angle really makes you feel confident on this bike. Having the 29-inch wheels feels like you can definitely bomb through some rough stuff. I think that 150 and 140 is a really balanced number. And yeah, I just put on the Cascade Components aftermarket lower link, which actually brings the rear end of the bike up to 150. Again, check out my review on that.
Yikes! Big old wall ride. Natural nonetheless.
I'm not a huge Strava warrior. I do tend to use Strava when we're on longer trips just so we can kind of keep track of our mileage. I definitely put up a huge PR on the lower Black Mountain descent there in Brevard in the Pisgah National Forest on the Hightower. And while I think that this thing is an absolute beast on the downhills, certainly if I were just going to be doing lift access or shuttle runs, it might be worth looking at the Megatower. But if you're doing a lot of trail riding, the Hightower to me is where it's at. Let's talk about some negatives. I want to give you the full picture here. Most of the negatives for me revolve around the rear shock. And while the VPP suspension, the lower link design, is a huge plus of this bike, it also creates some negatives. For one, you can only run a certain height to dropper post, especially if you're like me and you're on a medium or smaller frame. I would love to be able to run a 200 mil dropper post. I know that sounds greedy. I'm able to fit the 180 really well, but I love the way bikes look when you're actually able to slam that collar all the way down to the frame. You can't do that because the lower link design actually prevents you from having a longer dropper post on the size medium. The 180 is still super phenomenal. That's a picky one. Also, relating to the lower link, it actually makes setting up your rear shock a little bit more difficult. It's harder to see the rear shock in regards to setting your sag and checking to see how much travel you're using. And it's also a difficult area to clean. Just in general, because of the lower link design and how it kind of goes through the lower triangle, it just makes it a difficult area to access. And so cleaning it, if you're somebody that likes to just keep your bike super clean, that's a harder area to clean. In fact, to get under the lower link is almost impossible without actually taking out the lower link. And again, setting your sag, it's just a little bit aggravating to be able to get to that area. I would definitely recommend finding a brush that you can actually get into this very narrow area, and it makes cleaning it so much easier. Also relating to the rear shock is a lack of progression in the suspension curve of the Santa Cruz Hightower. I actually felt like there was a similar lack of progression when I spent time on the Megatower, but in general, I've had a little bit of difficulty setting up the rear shock to be progressive enough to not just blow through its travel on bigger hits. Now, first upgrade that I made was the RockShox Megneg, and it certainly helped me to be able to get more progression while still maintaining small bump sensitivity. But even with the Megneg, I still didn't have the progression that I felt like I needed to really have the rear suspension match what it feels like this bike is actually capable of. But I more recently added the Cascade Components aftermarket lower link, which has blown my absolute mind. It changes everything. Now, it's a real shame that you have to do that on such an expensive bike, but I like everything else about the bike so much. Basically, the shape of the bike and the way that the bike is designed, I love it enough that it was worth that upgrade to me, because now I have what I feel like is a ridiculously capable, well-rounded trail bike that's capable of taking me pretty much anywhere I'm gonna take it. Certainly, again, if I were just doing bike parks, I would get a Megatower, but I would still probably put that Cascade lower link even on the Megatower. And so that is one of the negatives for me, is just a lack of progression of the rear shock. But the silver lining is, between the Megneg and or the Cascade link, you can really alleviate that and get such an awesome performing rear shock. So is the Hightower the bike for you? To me, if you're only gonna have one bike, the answer is wholeheartedly yes. If you're somebody that's gonna have a couple of bikes, maybe you have a hardtail or a shorter travel full suspension trail bike, then I think it would actually be worth looking at the Megatower, because the Megatower, you can definitely still put some big mileage in, but it's gonna be more capable even than the Hightower going downhill. But if you're only gonna have one bike, the Hightower is definitely, to me, the way to go, especially if you do a lot of mixed trail riding. It's just such a well-rounded package, it's really hard to beat the version 2 Hightower. So I genuinely feel like my riding has progressed by leaps and bounds since riding the Hightower. A lot of that is just good old-fashioned practice, but a lot of it for me has been getting on a bike that feels like it fits me like a glove. It feels super capable. I feel very confident on the bike. And to me, that's priceless. Just getting a bike that you feel really good on. I hope that you found this review helpful. I hope it helps you narrow down which bike is the right bike for you. Please consider subscribing to the channel, as I'm always trying to bring product reviews, ride videos, and check out my Biking with Pain series. As always, thanks for watching.